Marcus had always thought he understood what it meant to help people. Growing up in a small southern town bordered by endless wetlands, he had watched the local volunteer search and rescue team deploy countless times. They were the ones who found lost hunters, pulled teenagers from mud bogs, and recovered the remains of those who wandered too far into places they should have never gone. When he turned 21, Marcus decided it was time to contribute something meaningful to his community. He submitted his application to the Cypress Bend Volunteer Search and Rescue Team on a humid Tuesday morning in late March. The response came faster than he expected. A man named Dale called him 3 days later, his voice rough and weathered like old leather left too long in the sun. Dale explained that the team was always looking for new members, especially younger ones who could handle the physical demands of swamp rescue work. He told Marcus to meet them at the old fire station on Route 17 the following Saturday at 6 in the morning. Dale mentioned that they would start with basic training and orientation, and that Marcus should wear clothes he did not mind destroying. Before hanging up, Dale said something that stuck with Marcus in a way he could not quite explain. He said that the swamp had its own rules, and learning them was more important than any rescue technique they could teach. Saturday arrived with a thick fog that clung to everything like wet cotton. Marcus drove through the gray morning to the fire station, his truck headlights barely cutting through the mist. When he arrived, he found 5 vehicles already parked in the gravel lot. The old fire station was a squat concrete building that looked like it had been abandoned for years. Though Marcus knew the rescue team used it as their base of operations, he grabbed his backpack and walked toward the open bay door, where he could see several people gathered around a table covered with maps and equipment. Dale was easy to identify. He was a tall man in his late 50s, with silver hair cropped close to his skull and eyes that seemed to look through rather than at things. He shook Marcus' hand with a grip that was firm but not aggressive, and introduced him to the rest of the team. There was Sarah, a woman in her 40s who worked as an emergency room nurse and had been with the team for nearly 15 years. Next was Tommy, a younger guy maybe in his early 30s who ran a bait shop near the boat launch and knew the swamp waters better than anyone. Rachel was a quiet woman in her mid-20s who had joined the team 2 years ago after her younger brother went missing in the wetlands. They eventually found him, alive and hypothermic, tucked beneath a cypress, overhang 3 miles from where he had last been seen. The last member present was an older man named Frank, who did not say much, but nodded at Marcus with something that might have been approval. Dale spread a large topographical map across the table and began explaining the geography of their search area. The Cypress Bend region covered approximately 200 square miles of swamp, marsh, and hardwood hammocks. The water levels changed constantly depending on rainfall and seasonal flooding. Some areas were navigable by airboat. Others required walking through knee-deep water and mud. And still others were completely impassable tangles of vegetation and sinkholes. Dale traced his finger along several marked areas on the map, explaining that these were zones where they had conducted previous rescues or recoveries. He pointed to one section shaded in red marker and told Marcus that they never sent anyone into that area alone, not even the most experienced team members. The training began with basic swamp navigation and safety protocols. Sarah demonstrated how to properly use a compass and GPS unit, emphasizing that technology could fail in the dense canopy and that traditional navigation skills were essential. Tommy showed Marcus how to read water patterns and identify stable ground versus mud that could trap someone up to their waist in seconds. Rachel explained their communication systems, which included handheld radios, whistles, and in some areas, pre-positioned markers that teams could use to signal their location or status. Throughout all of this instruction, Marcus noticed that the team members kept mentioning rules, not official safety guidelines, but something else. Something they spoke about with a particular kind of seriousness that made his skin prickle. After several hours of classroom-style instruction, Dale announced that they would head out into the swamp for practical training. They loaded equipment into 2 airboats tied up at a small dock behind the fire station. The boats were flat-bottomed vessels powered by massive fans enclosed in protective cages, designed to skim across shallow water and vegetation. Marcus climbed into the boat with Dale, Sarah, and Frank, while Tommy and Rachel took the second boat. The engines roared to life with a deafening sound that made conversation impossible. They moved out into the waterway, cutting through curtains of Spanish moss that hung from ancient cypress trees like the hair of drowned ghosts. The swamp was both beautiful and unsettling. The water was the color of dark tea, stained by tannins from decaying vegetation. Cypress knees jutted up from the surface like gnarled fingers reaching toward the sky. Birds Marcus could not identify called from the thick undergrowth, their cries echoing strangely in the dense, humid air. Alligators sunned themselves on half-submerged logs, watching the boats pass with ancient disinterest. The smell was thick and organic, a mixture of rot and growth and water that had not moved in weeks. Everything felt alive in a way that was not quite natural, as if the swamp itself was a single breathing entity aware of their presence. They traveled for about 30 minutes before Dale cut the engine and let the boat drift into a small clearing surrounded by towering trees. The sudden silence after the engine noise was almost painful. Dale gestured for everyone to gather close, and when he spoke, his voice was low and serious. He told Marcus that what he was about to hear was not written in any manual and would not be found in any official training documentation. These were the rules that kept search and rescue workers alive in Cypress Bend, passed down from senior members to new recruits for as long as the team had existed. Dale said that Marcus could choose not to believe them, but he would be expected to follow them regardless. Lives depended on it, both the lives of the missing people they searched for and the lives of the searchers themselves. The first rule Dale explained was simple. If you hear someone calling for help, you never answer immediately. You stop, you listen, and you try to determine the direction and distance of the voice. You count to 30 in your head. If the voice calls out again during those 30 seconds, you respond and move toward it. If the voice only calls once and then stops, you mark your position and radio it into base, but you do not pursue it. Dale said this rule had been established after a search, and rescue worker named Jim Holloway disappeared 12 years ago. Jim had been part of a team searching for a missing fisherman when he heard someone shouting for help. He told his partner he was going to check it out and pushed through a thick stand of palmetto scrub toward the sound. His partner waited, heard nothing more, and tried to follow Jim's path. He found no trace of Jim, no footprints, no broken vegetation, nothing. Jim Holloway was never seen again. The fisherman they had been searching for turned up 2 days later on a highway 12 miles away, dehydrated but alive. He said he had never called out for help because he had been unconscious for most of his time in the swamp after falling and hitting his head. The second rule dealt with the physical markers teams would sometimes encounter in the swamp. If you find a structure that does not belong, you document it, photograph it, mark its location on your map, and you move on. You do not enter it. You do not touch it. You do not take anything from it. Sarah explained that over the years, searchers had found strange things deep in the wetlands, old hunting cabins that appeared on no property records, lean-to shelters made from cypress branches and mud, platforms built in trees that looked like deer stands, but were positioned in places no deer would ever go. Some of these structures seemed ancient. Others looked like they had been built recently. Once, a team found what looked like a small chapel made entirely from woven marsh grass, complete with a crude altar and dozens of white stones arranged in patterns on the ground. They photographed it, marked it, and left. When another team tried to find it 3 weeks later using the GPS coordinates, there was nothing there but open water. The third rule was about time. If you become separated from your team, you are to stay in one place and signal your position. You do not wander. You do not try to find your way back on your own. You wait, no matter how long it takes. This rule existed because the swamp could disorient even experienced navigators. The thick canopy blocked the sun. The water reflected light in confusing ways, and the landscape looked the same in every direction. People who tried to self-rescue often traveled in circles or headed deeper into the wetlands instead of toward safety. Dale told Marcus about a rescue worker named Patricia who got separated from her team during a nighttime search operation against protocol. She tried to find her way back to the boats. Her team found her 4 hours later, less than 100 yards from where she had been separated. But she had traveled in what her GPS track showed as a complex spiral pattern covering over 3 miles. When they found her, Patricia was unable to explain why she had moved in that pattern. She said she had been walking in a straight line the entire time. Frank spoke up for the first time, his voice quiet and rough. He told Marcus about the 4th rule: never follow the lights. Sometimes, especially at dusk or during the night, people would see lights moving through the swamp. Small flickering lights like lanterns or flashlights, drifting between the trees or hovering over the water. They might look like another search team or someone signaling for help. They were not. Frank said he had seen the lights himself on 3 separate occasions. Once, as a younger man, he had tried to reach them, thinking they might be a lost hiker. The lights stayed just ahead of him, always visible, but never getting closer. He followed them for 20 minutes before his team leader physically grabbed him and dragged him back. Frank said that when he finally stopped pursuing the lights, he realized he had been walking directly toward a sinkhole that would have swallowed him completely. The swamp was full of methane from decaying organic matter, and sometimes that gas would ignite in strange ways, creating what people called swamp gas, or will-o'-the-wisps. But Frank believed there was something more to the lights in Cypress Bend, something that used the natural phenomenon as camouflage for intentions that were not natural at all. The 5th rule was about sounds. The swamp was never truly silent, but there were good sounds and wrong sounds. Good sounds included bird calls, insects, frogs, the splash of fish or alligators, whined through the trees, and the normal noises of a living wetland ecosystem. Wrong sounds were harder to define, but every team member would learn to recognize them. Sarah described wrong sounds as things that did not fit, that made something in your brain recoil, even if you could not articulate why. The sound of a child laughing in an area where no child should be. Mechanical noises like gears or engines in parts of the swamp with no access roads. Music with no identifiable source. Worst of all, according to Sarah, was the sound of complete and total silence. If the swamp went completely quiet, if every bird and insect and frog suddenly stopped making noise, you stopped moving and you waited. You made yourself as still and quiet as possible until the normal sounds resumed. This particular guideline had saved lives during severe weather events, when the animals would sense approaching danger before humans could. But it applied to other situations as well. Rachel added a 6th rule that related specifically to finding missing persons. When you locate someone who has been missing in the swamp, you do not approach them alone. You radio in your find. You wait for backup. And then you approach as a team with at least 2 people making visual contact with the subject before anyone gets within touching distance. This rule seemed overly cautious to Marcus, and he asked why it was necessary. Rachel explained that sometimes the people they found were not in their right minds. Exposure, dehydration, hypothermia, or sheer terror could make someone behave unpredictably or even violently. There had been cases where missing persons attacked their rescuers, not out of malice, but because they were so disoriented they perceived the rescuers as threats. More than that, though, Rachel said quietly, there had been times when team members found something that looked like the person they were searching for, but was not quite right. She did not elaborate on what that meant, and no one else offered clarification. The seventh rule was simple but absolute. If someone tells you to leave the swamp, you leave immediately. No questions, no debate, no hesitation. This instruction could come from the team leader, from incident command back at base, or from any senior team member. Dale emphasized that this rule was not about authority or chain of command. It was about survival. There were situations that developed in the swamp that required immediate evacuation, and taking time to explain or argue could mean the difference between everyone getting out safely and someone not getting out at all. He told Marcus that in his entire time with the team, this rule had been invoked exactly 4 times. Each time, the teams had evacuated without question. Dale would not say what had prompted those evacuations, but the way he would not meet Marcus' eyes when he talked about it suggested there were stories he was not ready to share. The 8th rule dealt with what to do if you got injured in the swamp. Standard first aid applied, but there was an additional protocol. Any injury that drew blood required immediate attention and reporting. You cleaned it, you covered it, and you radioed it in. If the injury was serious enough to compromise your ability to move, your team would come to you and extract you from the field immediately, even if it meant suspending an active search. Tommy explained that this rule existed partly because of infection risk. The swamp water was teeming with bacteria, and any open wound exposed to it could become seriously infected very quickly. But he also mentioned that blood in the water attracted things. Alligators were the obvious concern, but there were other animals in the swamp. Wild boar, which could be extremely aggressive. Large snakes, things that might normally avoid humans, but would investigate the smell of blood. The 9th rule was about trust. You trusted your team and your equipment, but you never fully trusted the swamp itself. You did not assume that ground which was solid yesterday would be solid today. You did not assume that a water depth you measured in the morning would be the same in the afternoon. You did not assume that a route you had taken safely a dozen times would be safe on the 13th crossing. The swamp changed constantly, and treating it as predictable was a good way to end up dead or missing. Frank said that respecting the swamp meant acknowledging that it was not a park or a trail system. It was a wilderness that operated by its own rules, and humans were guests who could have that invitation revoked at any moment. The 10th and final rule was one that Dale saved for last. He looked directly at Marcus when he said it. If you see yourself in the swamp, you turn around and you leave immediately. You do not investigate. You do not try to rationalize it. You report it when you get back to base, and you take the rest of the day off from search operations. Marcus must have looked confused because Sarah quickly added clarification. She said that on very rare occasions, team members had reported seeing what appeared to be themselves in the swamp. A figure that looked exactly like them, wearing the same clothes, standing or walking in the distance. It was always too far away to reach, and it never acknowledged the person seeing it. This had happened enough times that it was now part of the established rules. No one had a good explanation for it, though theories ranged from heat exhaustion to tricks of light and shadow to something far stranger. What mattered was that everyone who had seen their own double and tried to approach it or spent too much time focused on it had experienced severe psychological distress afterward. One man had quit the team entirely and moved to another state. Whatever caused the phenomenon, engaging with it led nowhere good. After explaining the rules, Dale asked Marcus if he had any questions. Marcus had dozens of questions, but he found himself unable to articulate most of them. Finally, he asked the simplest and most direct one. Were the rules based on actual events, or just superstition and campfire stories? Dale's response was immediate and firm. Every rule existed because someone had died, disappeared, or been seriously harmed. Some of the rules were based on single incidents. Others were based on patterns observed over decades. The team had lost 7 members over the years, not counting Jim Holloway, who was still technically listed as missing. Each loss had taught them something about how to operate more safely in the environment. The rules were written in tragedy, and following them was how the current team honored those who had come before. They spent the rest of that first day conducting practical exercises in the swamp. Marcus learned how to deploy a rescue litter through thick vegetation, how to safely traverse deep mud using specialized boards and ropes, and how to identify signs of recent human passage in areas where footprints would not last more than a few minutes. By the time they returned to the fire station, the sun was setting and Marcus was exhausted. His clothes were soaked with swamp water and sweat. His boots were caked in mud, and he had insect bites on every exposed inch of skin. Dale told him he had done well for a first day, and that they would continue training over the next several weekends. If Marcus proved capable and committed, he would be allowed to participate in actual search and rescue operations within a few months. Over the following weeks, Marcus threw himself into training. He studied maps of the region until he could identify major landmarks and waterways without reference. He practiced navigation, until he could maintain a straight bearing through featureless swamp. He learned to operate the airboats, to use the radios, to read weather patterns, and to administer first aid in field conditions. He also spent time with each team member individually, listening to their stories and learning the unwritten knowledge that came from years of experience in the wetlands. Sarah told him about the psychological toll of search work, how finding someone too late could haunt you for years. Tommy taught him to read water conditions and predict where currents might carry a lost person or piece of evidence. Rachel showed him how to comfort the families of missing persons without making promises the team could not keep. Frank mostly remained quiet, but occasionally he would offer a brief observation or correction that revealed depths of knowledge Marcus was only beginning to understand. His first real call-out came on a Thursday evening in early June. Marcus was at home making dinner when his phone buzzed with the alert. Missing person, male, age 42, last seen entering the swamp on the eastern boundary near Old Mill Road approximately 4 hours ago. Family reported him overdue. All available team members to report to staging area immediately. Marcus felt a surge of adrenaline as he grabbed his gear bag and headed for his truck. He arrived at the staging area to find Dale already setting up the command post. Sarah, Tommy, and Rachel arrived within minutes. Frank pulled in shortly after, his old pickup truck rattling to a stop in a cloud of dust. Dale briefed them quickly. The missing man was named Robert Chen, an amateur photographer who had told his wife he was going to take pictures of the sunset from a spot he had scouted earlier in the week. He had taken his camera, a small backpack with water and snacks, and his phone. His wife had tried calling him when he did not return by dark, but the calls went straight to voicemail. She had driven to the access point where he had parked his car and found it still there with no sign of Robert. The initial search area was relatively small, a peninsula of high ground that extended into the swamp, popular with photographers and birdwatchers. It should have been a straightforward search. They split into 2 teams. Marcus went with Sarah and Tommy, while Dale, Rachel, and Frank formed the second team. The plan was to approach from opposite directions and sweep the peninsula systematically. They would maintain radio contact and regroup at the far end of the search area. The sun had already set, so they were operating with headlamps and flashlights. The swamp at night was a different world than during the day. The sounds were amplified, every splash and rustle seeming louder and closer. The beams of their lights created moving shadows that played tricks on the eyes. Marcus found himself remembering the rules, particularly the one about lights and the one about sounds. They moved carefully through the palmetto undergrowth, calling Robert's name every few minutes and listening for a response. Tommy led the way, his light sweeping back and forth across their path. Sarah stayed in the middle, monitoring the radio and coordinating with Dale team. Marcus brought up the rear, checking behind them and to the sides. About 20 minutes into the search, Marcus heard something. It was faint, almost lost beneath the normal swamp sounds, but it was distinctly human. Someone was humming. Not words, just a melody. He stopped walking and held up his hand to signal the others. Sarah and Tommy stopped as well, all three of them listening intently. The humming continued for a few seconds, then stopped. Marcus counted in his head, remembering the first rule. 1, 2, 3, 4. He reached 15 when the humming started again, from the same direction as before. It was off to their right, maybe 50 yards away based on the volume. He looked at Sarah and Tommy. Tommy shook his head slowly and tapped his radio. He called Dale team and asked if they heard anything. Dale responded negative. They had heard nothing unusual. Tommy asked for their position and confirmed they were on the opposite side of the search area, too far away to be the source of the humming. Sarah made the call. They would investigate, but would move as a unit and maintain constant communication with the other team. They adjusted their course and pushed through the vegetation toward where the sound had originated. The humming had stopped again, and Marcus found himself counting silently, waiting to see if it would resume. It did not. They reached a small clearing where the ground rose slightly above the water level. Tommy Light caught something, and he moved forward to investigate. It was a camera sitting on a flat rock. The lens was shattered, and the body of the camera was scratched and dented as if it had been struck repeatedly against something hard. Tommy radioed the find to Dale, while Sarah examined the camera more closely without touching it. She pointed out that the camera strap was still attached, but had been cut cleanly, not torn. Marcus swept his light around the clearing, looking for any other signs of Robert Chen. He found something that made his breath catch. There were footprints in the soft mud at the edge of the clearing, but they did not lead in or out. They simply appeared in the middle of the clearing and walked in a tight circle, around and around. Dozens of overlapping prints, creating a spiral pattern. At the center of the spiral was a single handprint pressed into the mud. Before Marcus could point this out to the others, they all heard it. A voice calling out, "Help, please help me." The voice was male, strained, frightened. It came from deeper in the swamp, past the clearing. This time the call was clear and unmistakable. Marcus started to respond, but Tommy grabbed his arm and shook his head. They waited, counting silently. 5 seconds, 10, 15, 20. At 25 seconds, the voice called out again. "Help me. I am hurt. Please." That was enough. Sarah radioed Dale team and reported they had voice contact with a possible subject. Tommy called out in response, identifying themselves as search and rescue. They heard movement ahead, crashing through the undergrowth. Tommy shouted for the person to stay where they were, that help was coming. The movement stopped. Tommy led them forward, moving faster now, but still carefully. They pushed through a thick stand of cattails and emerged at the edge of a large pool of open water. Their lights swept across the surface, and Marcus saw him. Robert Chen was standing in the water about 30 feet from shore. The water came up to his chest, and he was facing away from them, completely motionless. His arms hung at his sides, and his head was tilted back as if he were staring at the sky. Tommy called his name. Robert Chen. Can you hear me? Are you injured? Robert did not respond or move. Sarah radioed Dale Team again, reporting visual contact with the subject and requesting they join them immediately. She told Marcus to stay at the shore and keep his light on Robert while she and Tommy prepared to enter the water. Marcus kept his flashlight trained on the man in the water. Something felt wrong, though he could not identify what specifically was triggering his unease. Robert remained perfectly still, not even swaying with the movement of the water. Sarah and Tommy entered the pool slowly, testing the depth and substrate with each step. They were about 10 feet from Robert when Tommy stopped. He said something to Sarah that Marcus could not hear clearly. Sarah stopped as well, her light fixed on Robert. Then Robert's head tilted down, and slowly he turned to face them. Marcus' light was bright enough to see the man's face clearly. What he saw made his hands start to shake. Robert Chen's eyes were completely black, not just the pupils, but the entire eye from lid to lid. His mouth was open too wide, the jaw extended in a way that looked anatomically impossible. And he was smiling, not a natural smile, but something that used the mechanics of a smile without any of the emotion. It was the uncanny valley made flesh, something that looked almost human, but failed in ways that triggered every primal alarm in Marcus' brain. Tommy's voice came sharp and clear. Back to shore now. He and Sarah retreated quickly, but without panic, moving as they had been trained. Robert took a step toward them, and then another. The water barely rippled around him as he moved, which should have been impossible given his size and the resistance water would create. Marcus found his voice and called out to Tommy and Sarah to hurry. They reached the shore just as Dale Team crashed through the vegetation behind Marcus. Dale took one look at the situation and made an immediate decision. Everyone back to the boats. Now, that was the 7th rule. No questions, no debate. The 6 of them moved together back the way they had come, leaving Robert Chen standing in the water behind them. No one spoke as they navigated back to where they had left the airboats. Dale got on the radio and called their dispatch, reporting that they were suspending the search and returning to base. He did not explain why over the radio, simply stated it as fact. The dispatcher began to question the decision, but Dale cut her off and said he would provide a full report when they arrived. The boat ride back was tense and silent except for the roar of the engines. When they reached the dock, Marcus expected Dale to head straight to the command post to file the report. But instead, Dale gathered them in a tight circle away from anyone else who might overhear. He asked Tommy and Sarah to describe exactly what they had seen. They confirmed what Marcus had witnessed: the wrong movements, the black eyes, the impossible smile. Dale listened, then nodded slowly. He said they had not found Robert Chen. What they had found was something else, something that had either taken his appearance or taken him over. This was not the first time something like this had happened. Dale said they would report to the authorities that they had visual contact with the subject, but were unable to effect a rescue due to unsafe water conditions, and that a recovery team would need to be sent in with specialized equipment in daylight. It was not entirely a lie, just not the complete truth. The sheriff department sent their own search team into the area the next morning. They found Robert Chen camera exactly where Tommy had found it, but the clearing with the spiral footprints was now just undisturbed forest floor. They searched the pool where the team had seen Robert, but found nothing. No body, no evidence of anyone entering the water, nothing. The search continued for 3 more days before being called off. Robert Chen was listed as a missing person, presumed dead. His wife received sympathetic condolences and confusion about how someone could simply vanish in such a small search area. Marcus struggled with what he had seen. The logical part of his brain wanted to explain it away as shadows and stress and misperception. But he had seen it clearly, and so had Sarah and Tommy. They had all seen the same impossible thing. Dale told him that this was part of the job in Cypress Bend. Most searches were routine. Lost hikers were found cold and scared, but alive. Sometimes they recovered bodies of people who had succumbed to the elements, or accident, or medical emergency, but sometimes, rarely, they encountered things that did not fit into normal categories of experience. The rules existed partly to protect them from these encounters, and partly to help them survive when protection was not enough. Marcus continued with the team through the summer and into fall. He participated in 12 more searches. Most were successful. A couple of teenagers who had taken a canoe out and gotten lost in the maze of waterways, an elderly man with dementia who had wandered from his care facility and made it surprisingly far into the wetlands. A group of kayakers who had underestimated the distance of their route and gotten stranded when the tide went out. Each successful rescue reminded Marcus why he had joined the team. Each time they brought someone home safely, it validated the training and the risk and the strange rules they followed. But there were other incidents as well, small things that individually seemed insignificant, but collectively painted a picture of a place that operated by different rules than the world outside its boundaries. During a training exercise in August, Marcus heard someone call his name from deeper in the swamp. He stopped and counted to 30 as he had been taught. The voice did not repeat. He reported it, and they moved on. In September, during a search for a missing hunter, Rachel found a structure that had not been there on previous sweeps of the area. It was a small platform built between 3 cypress trees, about 15 feet off the ground. The platform was made of weathered wood that looked decades old, but the construction was too precise and stable to be that ancient. They photographed it, marked it on the map, and continued their search. When another team checked the coordinates 2 weeks later, there was no platform. The trees were there, but they showed no signs of ever having supported a structure. In October, Marcus had an experience that would have sent him running if not for his training and trust in the team. He was on a night search with Frank, just the 2 of them sweeping a section of high ground, while the rest of the team covered other areas. They were moving slowly through sparse pine forest when Marcus' flashlight illuminated something ahead. It was a person standing between 2 trees about 40 yards away. The figure was wearing the same rescue team jacket that Marcus had on, the same pants, the same boots. As Marcus' light hit the figure, it turned to face him. Even at that distance, even with the angle and the darkness, Marcus could see that the face was his own. Frank's voice came quiet and steady beside him. "Turn around. We are leaving." Marcus could not move. He was frozen, staring at himself, staring back at him. The doppelganger did not move either, just stood there watching. Frank put a hand on Marcus' shoulder and physically turned him around. "Walk. Do not look back." Marcus walked, his legs feeling disconnected from his body, following Frank through the trees. They maintained their pace for about 5 minutes before Frank radioed Dale and reported they were returning to the staging area. He gave no explanation over the radio, just stated it as fact. When they reached the others, Frank told them what had happened. Dale nodded and told Marcus to sit down, drink some water, and take the rest of the night off. No one questioned it. No one suggested he had imagined it. Rachel simply said that she was sorry he had experienced that, and that it got easier with time. Marcus was not sure whether she meant the memory of it or the likelihood of it happening again. November brought cooler weather and shorter days. The swamp changed with the season, the water levels dropping, some of the vegetation dying back, the animal activity shifting to different patterns. The team adapted their tactics accordingly, knowing that routes passable in summer might be blocked in fall, and vice versa. They had fewer callouts during this period, as fewer people ventured into the wetlands when the weather turned cold and unpredictable. Marcus used the downtime to study and train, working on his navigation skills and learning more about the wildlife and ecology of the region. It was a Saturday in mid-November when they got the call that would test everything Marcus had learned. A family of 4 had gone missing. Parents in their 30s, 2 children aged 7 and 9. They had been on a guided nature walk with a local tour company when the youngest child had wandered off the trail. The parents went after her immediately, telling the guide and the older child to wait. When they did not return after 10 minutes, the guide used his radio to call for help. The guide kept the older child at the trail while a preliminary search was conducted. By the time the rescue team was activated, the family had been missing for over 2 hours. Every available team member responded. This was an all-hands situation. Dale established the command post at the trailhead and coordinated with the tour company, the sheriff department, and the park service. The search area was large, but not impossibly so. The family could not have traveled far with a 7-year-old, especially through difficult swamp terrain. The weather was clear and temperatures were mild. Everything pointed to a quick, successful search, but Marcus felt a knot of anxiety in his stomach that had nothing to do with normal pre-search nerves. They deployed in 3 teams of 3, spreading out in a coordinated sweep pattern from the last known location. Marcus was with Sarah and Rachel. They moved methodically through the search grid, calling the family name every few minutes and watching for any signs of passage. About 40 minutes into the search, Rachel spotted something, a small shoe, pink, with cartoon characters on it, caught on a low branch. She radioed it in as a possible clue related to the missing child. Dale confirmed and told them to continue in that direction, while the other teams adjusted their patterns to converge on their location. They pushed forward through increasingly dense vegetation. The terrain was getting wetter, the water rising from ankle deep to knee deep. Sarah expressed concern that the family might have gotten disoriented and headed in exactly the wrong direction, away from the trail and toward the deeper swamp. This was not uncommon. Panic and poor decisions often led people farther into danger rather than back to safety. Marcus was about to suggest they pause and reassess when Rachel held up her hand in a stop signal. She had heard something. They all stopped moving and listened. At first, Marcus heard nothing except the normal ambient sounds of the swamp. Then he caught it. Singing. A child singing. The voice was thin and distant, but unmistakable. It was singing a nursery rhyme that Marcus recognized, but could not immediately name. Row, row, row your boat. The classic round that children sang in overlapping verses, but this child was singing it alone, and something about the rhythm was off. Too slow, too measured, almost mechanical. Sarah started counting out loud in a whisper. 1, 2, 3, 4. They waited through the full 30 seconds. The singing continued without pause throughout the count. At 30 seconds, Rachel keyed her radio and reported that they had audio contact with what might be one of the children. Dale acknowledged and told them to proceed with caution and maintain their unit integrity. The 3 of them moved toward the sound, which seemed to be coming from a dense thicket of willows ahead. As they got closer, the singing got louder, but no clearer. The voice remained thin and strange. They reached the edge of the willows and peered through the tangle of branches. In a small clearing beyond the thicket, they saw a girl. She appeared to be the right age, wearing clothes that matched the description they had been given. She was standing perfectly still in shallow water, facing away from them, singing the nursery rhyme in that same slow, mechanical cadence. Row, row, row your boat gently down the stream. Merrily, 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 life is but a dream. Rachel called out to her gently, using her name. Emma, Emma, we are here to help you. Can you hear me? The girl stopped singing, but did not turn around. Emma, your parents are looking for you. Are your mom and dad with you? Are you hurt? The girl remained motionless. Sarah radioed Dale again, reporting visual contact with possible subject matching the description of Emma Chen, age 7. She requested backup before approach. Dale confirmed and said Frank and Tommy were 3 minutes out. Those 3 minutes felt like an hour. Marcus kept his light on the girl, watching for any movement. She stood like a statue. Not even the natural small movements that a real child would make. No shifting of weight, no looking around, nothing. When Frank and Tommy arrived, Dale came with them. All 6 team members now surrounded the small clearing. Dale made the decision that he and Sarah would approach, while the others maintained a perimeter and kept watch. Dale and Sarah entered the clearing slowly, speaking calmly to the girl the entire time. Emma, we are from the search and rescue team. We are going to come help you. Can you tell us if you are hurt? They got within 10 feet of her when Dale stopped abruptly. He said something to Sarah that Marcus could not hear, but Sarah's reaction was immediate. She took 2 quick steps backward. Dale raised his voice and spoke directly to the girl. Where are your parents, Emma? Where are your mom and dad and your sister? The girl head tilted to the side at an unnatural angle, like a bird examining something on the ground. Then she spoke, and her voice was completely different from the singing voice. It was deep and resonant, far too deep for a child. They are in the water. They are always in the water now. You will be too. Dale triggered the evacuation order immediately. Everyone out, back to the staging area now. The team moved without hesitation. Years of training and trust taking over. They regrouped at the command post, where Dale made a call that Marcus did not fully understand. Dale got on the phone with someone, not the sheriff or emergency services, but someone else. He described what they had encountered using specific terminology that sounded almost like a code. He mentioned the number 7, which Marcus recognized as the 7th rule, evacuation. He also used phrases like confirmed anomalous contact and visual match with behavioral inconsistency. Whoever was on the other end of the call seemed to understand completely. Dale listened for a moment, then confirmed and ended the call. He turned to the team and explained there was a protocol for situations like this that went beyond normal search and rescue operations. Another organization would take over from here. The team had done their job by locating the children and recognizing that the situation was not what it appeared to be. Their official report would state that they had found a child matching the description of Emma Chen, but were unable to effect rescue due to hazardous conditions and the need for specialized extraction team. That report would satisfy the bureaucratic requirements. What really happened would be documented through other channels. Marcus wanted to know what would happen to the family, to the real Emma and her parents and sister. Dale said honestly that he did not know. Sometimes people who went missing in the swamp came back on their own days or weeks later with no memory of where they had been. Sometimes they were found deceased from natural causes. Sometimes they were never found at all. What they had seen in that clearing was not Emma Chen, or rather, it was not only Emma Chen. Something in the swamp had found her first, and whether she could be recovered from that was beyond the team capability to determine. The family case remained open for months. The older daughter, who had stayed with the guide, was placed with relatives. Search teams from multiple agencies continued periodic sweeps of the area. The media covered the story extensively, speculating about everything from wild animal attacks to human trafficking to murder-suicide. The rescue team members said nothing publicly beyond their official reports. Marcus struggled with the weight of knowing what he knew and being unable to tell anyone outside the team. Sarah told him this was part of the burden they carried. They saw things others did not see, knew things others did not know, and bore that knowledge in silence because speaking about it would either not be believed or cause panic that would help no one. Winter came to Cypress Bend. The swamp never truly froze, but the vegetation died back and the water became clearer and colder. Search calls slowed to almost nothing. The team used the quiet period for maintenance, training, and recovery. Marcus spent time talking with each of the team members individually, learning more about their experiences and how they had learned to cope with the strange reality of search and rescue in this particular place. Frank told him about the time he had seen lights during a search in the early 90s and how following them had nearly killed him. Rachel talked about finding her brother and how his rescue had brought her to the team, but also left her with questions she knew would never be answered. Tommy described growing up in the area and hearing stories from old-timers about the swamp that he had dismissed as superstition until he started working rescue operations. Sarah shared that she had once been a complete skeptic, believing everything could be explained by science and reason, until the swamp showed her otherwise. Dale was the last to open up to Marcus, waiting until a cold evening in January when just the two of them were organizing equipment in the storage room of the fire station. He told Marcus about the first time he had encountered something wrong in the swamp, back when he was new to the team himself over 20 years ago. They had been searching for a missing teenager who had gone into the wetlands on a dare. Dale and his partner had found the kid sitting by a pool of water, seemingly fine. But when they got close, they realized the kid was not breathing. He was not moving at all except for his eyes, which tracked their movements with an awareness that should not have been possible in someone with no pulse or respiration. Dale Partner had panicked and run. Dale had frozen, unable to process what he was seeing. The thing that looked like the teenager had stood up and walked into the water, sinking below the surface without a ripple. Dale had reported finding no trace of the missing person. 3 days later, the teenager had walked out of the swamp on his own, alive and mostly unharmed. He had no memory of the 3 days he had been missing. Dale had never told anyone the full story until now. Marcus asked Dale the question that had been building in him for months. What was the swamp? What were these things they encountered? Dale was silent for a long moment before answering. He said he did not have a complete answer. The swamp was old, older than the towns and roads and modern world that surrounded it. It had been there for thousands of years, accumulating layers of life and death and transformation. Some places on Earth were thin, where the boundaries between what we understood and what we did not became permeable. Cypress Bend was one of those places. Whether the things they encountered were spirits or interdimensional beings or manifestations of the swamp collective consciousness, Dale could not say. What he knew was that they were real, they were powerful, and they operated by rules that had to be respected if humans wanted to survive encounters with them. Marcus asked if they were evil. Dale thought about that carefully. He said no, not evil in the moral sense. They were other. They existed according to their own nature and logic. Sometimes that nature was indifferent to humans. Sometimes it seemed hostile. Sometimes it might even be curious or playful in ways that happened to be dangerous. The rules the team followed were not about fighting or controlling these forces. The rules were about coexisting, about knowing when to help and when to leave, when to look and when to look away, when to stay and when to run. Survival in the swamp meant accepting that humans were not the dominant force in that environment. As winter turned toward spring and Marcus approached his first full year with the team, he realized that he had changed. He moved differently in the world now, more aware of the edges where the known met the unknown. He listened more carefully to the quality of silences. He paid attention to lights and sounds and the feeling of being watched. He had learned not just the practical skills of search and rescue, but also the deeper knowledge of how to exist in a place where normal rules did not fully apply. He had learned the cost of that knowledge as well, the nightmares and the hypervigilance and the weight of secrets that could not be shared. But he had also learned why the team did this work despite the cost, because people got lost and they needed help, because families deserved answers even if those answers were incomplete, because someone had to stand in that liminal space between the ordinary world and the other, ready to pull people back from edges they did not know they were approaching. The rules kept the rescuers alive. The commitment to service gave their survival purpose. And the bond between team members, forged in shared impossible experiences, made the burden bearable. Marcus knew now that he would stay with the Cypress Bend Volunteer Search and Rescue Team. He would learn more rules as they revealed themselves through experience. He would have more encounters with things that defied explanation. He would carry more secrets and more losses. But he would also save lives and bring people home and stand as a guardian on the boundary of a place where the world was stranger and older and more mysterious than most people ever knew. He had joined the team to help people. He was staying because he understood now that help took many forms. And sometimes the most important help was knowing when to follow the rules that others might dismiss, when to trust what you had seen even when it seemed impossible, and when to walk away from the swamp before it decided not to let you leave. The rules were written in tragedy and maintained through vigilance. They were not suggestions or superstitions or guidelines for the overly cautious. They were the accumulated wisdom of people who had learned the hard way what the swamp demanded for those who entered its domain. Marcus had memorized them all. Never answer a voice immediately. Never enter strange structures. Never try to self-rescue if separated. Never follow the lights. Trust your ears for wrong sounds. Never approach found persons alone. Always leave immediately when told. Report and treat all injuries. Never trust the swamp itself. And never, ever investigate if you see yourself. These were the rules that kept search and rescue workers alive in Cypress Bend. Marcus would follow them, would teach them to new members who came after him, and would respect the reality they represented. Because the swamp was patient, and the swamp was old, and the swamp held secrets that humans could only glimpse at the edges of understanding. And sometimes, on the quietest nights, when the mist rose thick between the cypress trees and the water lay still as black glass, Marcus would remember that first real search and the thing that had worn Robert Chen face. He would remember the mechanical singing of the girl in the clearing. He would remember seeing himself standing between the pines. And he would know with absolute certainty that there were rules worth following, even when the reason for them could not be fully explained. Because in the swamp, breaking the rules had consequences that were worse than anything skepticism or rational thought could protect you from. In the swamp, the rules were the only thing standing between rescue workers and becoming another story used to teach the next generation what lines should never be crossed.